Так. Доброго дня, колеги. Дякую тим, хто прийшов вчасно. Незалежно від цього, ми все одно розпочинаємо нашу роботу. Семінар ми поставили на запис. Всі, кому буде цікаво, вони зможуть його переглянути пізніше, в зручний для них час. Ну, а зараз надаю слово Владиславу Шапіру. Власне, свою функцію я вже виконав. Запросив, організував. Будь ласка, Владислав.
Доброго дня. Мене звуть Владислав Шапіро. Я народився і виріс в Києві, вчився в 145-й школі Київського університету. Вже останні 31 рік. Живу в Америці, в Бостоні. І сьогодні я буду розповідати про те, чим я займаюся останні 20 років. Identity, Governance and Administration. Це дуже важлива тема, нова, яка розвивається абсолютно шаленими темпами. Можу сказати, що наш ринок оцінювався десь, наприклад, коли я починав працювати десь в 2004-2005 році в десь $100 мільйонів приблизно на той час. На сьогоднішній день справа йде в 300-400 мільярдів, якнайменше. А вже скоро воно буде розвиватися ще більше. Значить, я приготував для вас семінар англійською мовою, починаючи після початку. Починаємо тільки англійською мовою говорити. Це я роблю для того, щоб ви звикали до термінології, до того, як ми до цього ставимося. Ну і крім того, я думаю, що англійську мову треба знати професійно, інакше дуже складно працювати в нашій області. Я тільки що повернувся з величезного конференції, яка була в місті Денвері, Колорадо. На конференції було присутньо 2,5 тисячі людей. Це Identity конференція, називається Identiverse. Просто динаміку. Конференція була в 11 раз. Перша конференція мала десь 150-200 людей. А тиждень тому це було 2,5 тисячі. Це приблизно характеризує ринок. Ну що ж, починаємо з слайдів. Значить, і зараз кажу і почнемо трошки розповідати, про що воно. Якщо будуть які у когось питання, будь ласка, наприкінці ви можете, звичайно, задавати. I would definitely prefer
в чаті писати, так.
Чи писати в чат. І Володя вже буде відслідковувати це. Okay, so again, the theme of today's presentation is Identity Governance and Administration 101. As you probably know, there is a tradition in America, all of the classes at the universities, which are introductory, they call them 101. So my name is Vladislav Shapiro. I am a founder of the company called Custodity, which is the consulting company in identity governance administration space. We also work with vendors, big companies who need that kind of a service. And today I would like to present you the whole field of identity governance administration. So discussions points will be the basics of the identity governance, the current state of the job market, how to get into the space, which means if you've never been exposed and never worked in the space, what should you do to be able to participate? And what's going to happen next for our industry and what's going to happen next for our work. So let's start with the very simple things. What is identity governance and identity and access management? The key story is very simple. As you know, in every organization, people have access to many, many different systems. And that access is on a completely different level. For a long time, it was decided by basically application owners and technical people. Who has access to what, when, if you need it, you call them, you email them, and they give you an access if you need it for work. But the problem is that local controls is not good for the company because at the end, nobody knows who has access, right? How many people has this application or how many people has access to that specific data? That is why I would say around 35 or maybe even more years ago, the whole new area showed up called identity and access management. That particular one is all about that the right people have the right access to the right resources at the right time for the right reasons. The idea behind that is extremely important for business. With even before all the regulations show up, business needs to know how many people can read, write, and alter the data located somewhere. How many people can do certain functions? How many people can do certain tasks? It's important from the management standpoint and also from the practical standpoint. So like say, for example, if there is a functionality which company has to provide 24 hours a day, 360 days a year, the company needs to make sure that at every moment somebody is available to help or somebody is available to actually do something with it. So that was the beginning. The next step was to create the whole technology. So the technology itself contains of the following things. First of all, as you understand, the technology has the ability to actually connect to the applications, right? And create accounts, change accounts, modify accounts in many, many different applications of the company. That's called provisioning. From the other standpoint, it should be able to connect to the what we call the authoritative sources, which is human resources data, data about, let's say, consultants, students, I don't know, many, many different things. So the key areas which we showed on this picture looks the following way. There are 4 key functions in the whole IAM space. First function is definitely administration, which means someone has to control what is going on. Someone has to manage the access. Someone has to manage all the rules under which people get access or remove from the access. Someone has to manage how many people we have, how many applications we have. That is administration. And in the center of that is identity governance, which we're going to discuss. The second part is definitely authorization. Authorization is about the rights, right? First, we authenticate ourselves, which means we have to put, for example, username and password, that the system know that you are who you are. And then whoever is in charge should authorize you to do within the system what needs to be done. Okay? So that is why part of this inside authorization called access management, this is what we were telling you, who can authenticate and what stuff they can do. And the second part is what we call the privileged access management. That is a special type of access created for example, administrators. That's people who can do much more than everybody else. That's the people who can basically, completely administer the system. And that access should be controlled from much stronger standpoint than the regular access. The third part definitely is what we call the analytics. Well, what is analytics is all about? The analytics should basically tell us how people use the systems, how often they're logging in, how often are they requesting it, what are the reasons behind that, what are the correlations between different users and between different groups related to access. So the analytics, which became right now an extremely important part, is basically data analysis going from 2 sides. From the internal side, like, we can actually look at the logs and who did what during the time, and what we call the top-down from the business standpoint. So business say, okay, we need these people to work on our accounting system. Okay, so how often are they using that system and what exactly they're doing there? So the combination of those gives us analytics. And finally, assurance. Assurance in English is we want to make sure that what we're doing is correct. So assurance includes itself an access and privilege access authentication. It also includes all the regulatory part, which means compliance. There are rules which government tells us to do. Because famous ones is GDPR, right? Which is the privacy rules in Europe, which requires you, any provider of the data, any people who has the data, follow the rules and inform users that they have rights to say, I don't want to expose this data to some people, and for others I can, right? So there are massive regulations in America. There are probably some regulations in Ukraine related to how the data is exchanged, how the data is stored, who can have access to this data, and how it's controlled. Okay, that's the 4 areas. Okay, moving along. The identity governance itself contains of, I would say, this is, again, all of the slides I'm showing, that's the slides from Gartner. Gartner is one of the biggest analytics firm and a consulting firm in the world, in specializing in technology. In every space of technologies, there is a Gartner analyst and Gartner group who works on it. So that one is particularly created for the identity governance group. So from the Gartner standpoint, the identity governance contains of 7 huge elements. The first going to be on top, which is right here. It's identity lifecycle. What's that? The identity lifecycle is the life of identities within the system. What is identity? Well, there are many different definitions, but the definition I like about identity looks like this. It's basically projection of you as a person into the corporate environment. It's not you, but it's your projection, because part of what you have is important to have an environment. For example, in every company in HR, you have human resources, you have your information about your first name, your last name, your address, right? The salary, the position, right? All of those is not you, but it's a projection on you, right? The same thing, identity contains information about who is your manager, what department you belong to, what locations, work locations you have, and also what kind of responsibilities you have in this particular case. And why we're talking about the life cycle? Because as you know, nobody works in a company forever. So when you start with the company, we have to create identity. When you work and move within the company, we have to change your identity. And when you leave the company, we have to deprovision or offboard, like you say in English, your identity from the system. That is the life cycle. The next one we call entitlement management. Okay, what is entitlement? Entitlement is the right, your right to do something within the corporate environment. For example, I can read the file from a certain list. That's entitlement. I can change and update certain data in a database. That's entitlement. Ability to, for example, add a person in HR in the human resource database or human resource system, that's also entitlement, right? So entitlement is any kind of right within the system. Someone has to manage it. For a long time, it was managed on a kind of local level, right? Every entitlement within the application or within the database was managed by the administrator, but it's wrong, because administrator of the database has absolutely no idea why you need access to a specific data table, for example, or the information within this table. That should be decided by business. That is why entitlement management right now is the global protocol containing what we call catalog of all the entitlements. And company defines and implement the rules and processes and what we call, now we're going to talk about roles, how to access this thing, how to assign someone an entitlement, how to deassign the entitlement when the project is over. That is called entitlement management. That's the whole space by itself. The next one is what we call the policy and role management. Okay, every company has policy. If you work ever in your corporate environment, you've probably seen one. Because if, let's say, there's a certain process, there's a certain definitions of what persons should do, for example, to get access to a specific system. And in some cases, there is something called the separation of duties, which means there is a rule which does not allow you to get one access if you have another one. Typical example, if you have access to account payable, then you cannot have access to account receivable. This is a classical separation of duties access. Now, what is the role? Well, as you understand, if we need to give entitlements to people, right? For example, if I have 100 people and all of them have to receive 10 entitlements, the same. So how many operations I have to do? As former mathematician, I can say it's 100 times 10 is going to be 1,000 operations. Instead of that, we can say, you know what? Those people belong to the same role, which means their functions in the company are the same. So why we change this paradigm and do this? We create this abstract level called business role. We assign 100 people to this business role, and we assign all the 10 entitlements to the same business role. This way, every person who is assigned to a role get all of those 10. How many operations we have to do? We have to add 100 people plus 10 entitlements. So we're talking about 110 operations versus 1,000. That is why it's a big shift, I would say, with the companies. So instead of assigning entitlements or rights directly, we're creating roles. We assign entitlements to roles and we assign people to it. The whole process of creating roles is by itself a very big business and technological problem. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Next area is what we call the workflow. Workflow is step-by-step process of what needs to happen for certain things to be assigned to a person or de-assigned. So the workflow process is also within the software, it's defined as, elements step-by-step or square-like and connected to each other. There are two types of workflows. One of them called the approval workflows, which means before anybody gets access to something, someone in a company should say, oh yeah, that's a good idea, which called approval. And there is something called fulfillment workflow. That's the workflow which actually creates, for example, new account in Active Directory. So user can use all of the resources connected to Active Directory. Okay. Now, moving along, access requests and certification. Well, as we discussed, the people need to request things to be able to access. That's called access request. But once in a while, after people get it, someone has to take a look and certify it, which means showing that whatever person has is up to date and that person does not have extra access, which it doesn't use or she doesn't use. Why it is important? Because extra access creates extra risk. Hackers, when they come into the system, they do what they call the lateral movement, which means they start as a very low-level person, and then they try to find someone who has access to a specific system and never used it. That's why nobody will ever figure it out that that particular access was even used. Okay, that is what access certification is all about. We just talked about fulfillment, which means accessing, giving somebody, creating somebody's access. Connector is the software piece which connects identity governance system with the application. So if you look at any identity governance product, you will see there are hundreds of connectors created. Some of them, for example, to SAP, the Active Directory, to, Azure, Workday, whatever, many systems. That's called connectors. And finally, the last one was analytical piece, which is called auditing reporting. So systems, companies, like people who ever worked with accounting, they know one of the critical parts of the story is audit, which means checking that everything is correct, and finally reporting, producing reports for the management to know what is going on. Management, as you understand, does not have time to go through the system and look by themselves. They use questions. They ask you questions like, how many people today are having access to our accounting system? How many people of those got access in the last 30 days, right? How many people access will expire in the next 30 days? How many licenses are we using right now? So we bought 10,000 licenses, but in reality, we have only 5,000 people who use them. Okay, maybe we can get rid of the licenses. The idea of reporting, the idea of auditing, people know, right? The check, and the idea of reporting is to look at the system and make sure we're using them properly, or we have to make a change. Okay. Hopefully, this is. I understand that a lot of those terminology for you are pretty new, and what is most interesting about this area is that IGA is not purely technical. This is a connection between the technology and business. And this is why it becomes very interesting from the standpoint of future jobs, from the standpoint of the personalities needs to be in the field, because they need to be savvy in both. We're going to talk about that in details. So, who are we controlling from identity lifecycle standpoint? That's your workforce, your contractors, your customers, and non-human accounts. You probably heard about RPAs, which is the computer programs which run and perform actions, right? So what do we do? As I already discussed, we manage joiners, movers, and leavers. We support administration, and we have a customer. CIM is a customer identity management capability. We discussed a little bit about entitlements. I'm just going to show you the slides. It's basically talking about, again, this enrichment, deep insights of the entitlements, fine grade, meaning they're going to be a big entitlement, for example, access to database. And within that entitlement, there is a specific access to a table. And within that entitlement, it could be ability to write in the specific column the data. That is what's called the fine grade. From the policy and role management, again, it's, I've already talked about all of those, but this is kind of a summarizing. The validity periods for the employees, the grouping entitlements in the roles, what we discussed, the enforcement of segregation of duties, which means if you cannot have two entitlements at the same time, some systems should prevent it from getting it. The policies, the peer group analysis to help evaluation, meaning if both of us have the same job, but for some reason we have a different access, someone has to take a look and say why. That is called peer group analysis. The policies connecting business role to technical roles, I'll give you a little bit of explanation about that. So there is a separation. Business roles is something you have to do according to your business position. What you do day to day. Some people, job is to make sure that the operations and network system is working fine. That's their job. So the job description is making sure that people can access the corporate resources, right? That is business description. When it comes to the technical roles, that is what specifically does it mean. So for network administrator, it means accessing to the firewalls, to the network routers, to the Wi-Fi routers and things like that. That is technology. So the business role requires people to have different technology roles. And management of those are completely separate because the business roles are managed by business and technology roles managed by administrative specific technological systems. Okay. As we discussed, the workflows as the basically, allows you to define the process by modules. And when is this used the most? For delegations and escalations. Delegations means if I have rights to do something and go on vacation, I give it to somebody else. The escalation process means something supposed to be done but has not been done. Like we're still waiting for access to a particular system. Then within the organization, someone should be able to do it for one, even without delegation. You have to escalate it on a higher level, on a management level, and then whoever's in management can perform that action. And definitely electronic signature, I don't need to explain you that, right? More and more, we're going into the world where documents are not signed by the physical, what we call in English, wet signature, to an electronic signature, which is nothing else as a piece of code sitting on the document, which can be encrypted back to you or decrypted back to you and proving that it was you who signed the document. Okay. When we go to the access request, the most important thing what we're talking about is certification part is what we call the campaign management, which means once a year, once a quarter, somebody has to check if people have right access. Someone has to certify if people are assigned to the right roles, right? Those campaigns could be what we call the risk-based, which means, do I need to verify access I have? Probably not. If I have access to a very sensitive part of information within the company, yes, I should. But if, for example, I have access to a company corporate website, do I need to verify it all the time? Probably not, because if I still work for the company, I should be able to have that access. And that's why we call something called micro-certification. So instead of certifying every element, we're just making sure that people have right access to a specific area. We talked a little bit about fulfillment and provisioning. Let's go a little bit deeper into this. How this thing in general works, okay? If I need access to a specific system, there are two ways of actually doing it. Either I am calling service desk and say, please give me access to this particular system. And the second one is if I do what we call direct provisioning, meaning that within the system, I can go to the catalog, I can choose what I need, I click on it and say, I need this access. And the system behind the scene run a workflow, which from the identity governance system connects to the actual vendor product application, for example, Active Directory, through a predefined connector, and performs automatically provisioning action, which is creating on my account and giving me right roles. Okay. The other, we're not going to define other things. You can take a look at this. This is our standard, which from the service access system, and from the scheme, which is ability to provision any application in the cloud. It's called scheme standard. Again, we are not going to discuss that because somebody would like to take a look. You can take a look at it. And RPA based, it's a robot, right? It's robot processing application, which is not a human, which is a program created to perform a specific task. Okay, again, for creating a certain task, this RPA needs access to a specific system. Because if I need to, for example, add somebody to Active Directory group, right? I need access to that Active Directory, and I need rights within Active Directory specifically to add that account to the specific group. We discussed a little bit audited reporting. I don't want to spend a lot of time here because that is more like self-explanatory. And that was the last. And finally, the element within the system, which I would like to go over, is called identity analytics and machine learning. So basically, again, when we analyze why people have access to specific systems, it would be a very good idea to have, first of all, the idea of the risk, right? So say, you know, certain data is much more sensitive, certain data is less sensitive. And the risk really defines by business. And if your risk of a particular user is very high, then the system should try to figure it out. Maybe I should do some cleanup. Maybe I should remove some access, right? Maybe I should look for some issues. The dormant or orphan accounts, let me give it a definition. A dormant account is an account which is almost never used to access systems. The orphan account is an account which does not connect to any identity. Identity is your projection to the system. Account is the way you log in. Somewhere within identity governance, there is a connection. Who does that account belong to? Who is that person? Is this person still within the company? If it's yes or no, if it's still in the company, it's okay. But if it's not, then it's an orphan. Orphan accounts are extremely easy to attack from the social engineering standpoint, from the technical standpoint, because since there is no person behind it, and if its account is open, when someone using this account to log into the system, nobody knows about it. And if nobody knows about it, it becomes immediately a big, big, big problem. Okay. And finally, the governance on the fly, meaning sometimes it's very hard to predict who needs access to what and when. So we should be able to get it through analysis, to get it through the current situation, And sometimes machine learning helps us to predict or to show that, oh, Vlad was just doing a specific project, and that project requires this kind of access. Even though he hasn't ordered that access yet, he will need it. So how about we're gonna go and give them an access just based on the fact that he is a part of a certain business project. That is what we call the role mining, recommendations, and on-the-fly provisioning. The other thing which we can do is we can discover violations. Because violations comes from government bodies, right, like regulations, and it also comes from experience. So people know that if you have access to a specific system and can do certain things, you probably should not do others, right? And for example, if you would like to be an administrator of a system, chances are that the company requires you to be a full-time employee, not a contractor, which came for like a month. Or if you're a contractor and your contract is over a month ago, but you still have administrative access, we have a problem, okay? That is what the analytics and machine learning is discovering. Now I would like to stop and see if anybody has a specific questions before we move on, just from the basics of identity governance. I know a lot of information still. Anybody has any questions? You can speak up or write it in the chat. Just gonna turn on chat, by the way. I don't have it. All right, moving along. So, as you understand, to be able to perform all of those actions, there should be some kind of a software, which is called identity governance software, which you can buy. Or so the Gartner specifically creates something called Magic Quadrants and put all of the top vendors into the quadrant. By the way, those vendors you see, that's not the whole list of vendors. Last week, when I was at the Identiverse 2022, we had booth of almost 60 different vendors, all of them in the identity space. So this particular one shows the top leaders, okay? And when company chooses the tool, it actually goes into the quadrant. Why we have 4 elements there? Well, this is how Gartner defines this. The first, we start with the top, leaders. That's the companies who are the most visibility, has the most customers, and from the standpoint of Gartner, has the most capabilities, right? So as you see, there are 5 big companies there. And so basically, if you, as the customer, are looking for a full solution, you're going there and see, I want one of the leaders. At the same time, you have to be very careful because that means the most expensive ones. And that means that sometimes functionalities of those companies are much more than you actually need. And you don't want to pay for, you really don't want to buy a Ferrari on the completely, bad road with absolutely no signs and you can't drive on it, right? So that is no point. It's better to have, the car which slowly but surely goes through the bad road. That is why the other pieces, the challengers are companies, as you see, there are 2 X's. One of them called completeness of vision, basically functionalities, features. And another one is ability to execute. The ability to execute is basically how fast can you turn this thing on, right? How good is the company itself, the vendor, of helping the customer to be absolutely 100% independent of working on the product, okay? That is why if you go to challengers, that's the people who are pretty good at execution, but their functionalities and their feature list is smaller than the list of the leaders. Again, it's not bad. Companies right here, for example, Oracle is right there, right? Or like Hitachi. So, but it is, that particular is for customers who do not need a full solution, who are looking for a particular part. Not all of the 7 elements, but maybe they need just provisioning. Maybe the roles are not there yet, okay? If you go down, you will see the niche players. That's the companies who are specializing in specific verticals. For example, there's one of the companies here who is specializing in just current situation on the job market with this particular space. So we're talking about the current state of job market. I'm going to be recording started again. What is going on the job market today for our space? Okay. The biggest challenge on the market, as you already seen, is that it's extremely hard to find a person with business-oriented mind, technical hands-on capability, and great communication skills. Because as you saw, the space requires those three completely separate skills. You cannot be just technical because you have to understand what's going on with the business, right? Because what we're doing in this space is we're trying to enable business to do their job. But business and technology speaking completely different language. You should be able to have communication skills to actually ask business the right questions and understand what they meant when they gave you an answer. Then translate it to the technologist and find questions which you need to ask technologists to be able to implement what the business people want to do. Another thing for you is very important to understand the best practices of the space and translate them to business. When business asks you questions, they immediately expect you to be the subject matter expert, to give them idea of what they need to do. Okay. But in this particular case, ability to answer those questions depends on your communication skills. Can you, find the answer on the question? Can you find the right people who can answer the question? Can you find someone in charge? Sometimes it's very difficult because a lot of business rules are unwritten rules. And there's one person who put it together or one person who knows the details why it was done. You have to find that person. So just people who know programming, not going to work. Just people who know business, not going to work. All three are very important. This is why it's extremely hard to find people in this space. Okay. So as you probably know, there's a whole profession called professional services consultants. Just think for a second what IGA professional consultant main job requirements are. Look at this list. Okay. You have to understand the business. You have to be able to communicate with those three types of owners. You can and you should come up with a solution quickly based on ever-changing situations. By the way, I can definitely refer that of what's going on unfortunately, in Ukraine right now. But nobody can give you ahead the answers on all of your questions. Those answers should be found based on the changing circumstances, on the situation today. You should be very nice and very gentle with people you're working with, right? It's almost a customer support attitude towards the subject matter experts when you talk to them. You have to have a hands-on experience of one or more RGA vendors. You have to know what the vendors do, what's the difference between different products, between, for example, one identity and SailPoint. You definitely have to have some technical skills. You should know SQL. You should know one of the more scripting languages, depending definitely on the taste. It should be, and you do need to know one of the more programming language. Again, you don't need to be a developer. You don't have to be an administrator, but you should understand how it works, and you should be able, in case you need it, to actually write the code. You need to be able to become an expert of cross technology between web, authentication, authorization, administration, cloud, many, many other things, right? Again, you don't need to be an expert on each of them, but you should be able to understand how they communicate together and how they work together. And finally, without organizational skills, you can't do it. You need to be extremely organized. You need to be on time. You need to realize that a lot of things you do not depend just on you, because sometimes you ask the question from the business or technology over the organization you need to implement it for, and you still didn't get the answer. So you need to be persistent, and you need to predict that answer in time, your probably deadline should be moved. Or sometimes you have to go to the management of that person and say, hey, I asked the question a week ago and I need an answer. Otherwise, the whole project is going to be on hold. So all of this together, right, are the requirements for the job. And whoever can do it together, that person will become an absolute unique qualified. Like in English, we're saying diamond in the rough. And it's very hard to find one. And by the way, is any of you feeling comfortable of all of that? Please let me know. And that would be an interesting, headway towards our area, because currently the situation is that we do not have enough people who can do it, right? And people are at premium. There's no people. Because of that, and because of the remote situation, 5 years ago, even talking about remote workforce and data governance was absolutely impossible. But today, customers are ready to use remote workforce. Vendors before were requiring only, 5-10 years of experience with the product before even working with someone. But today, they accept less experienced personnel because what's important for them is what I put on the slides before, the attitude, ability to learn, ability to pivot, ability to have all three areas of communication, business, and technology, okay? The consulting partners, which means the companies who are specializing in implementing the vendors of the customers, are looking for new blood, for new people, because there is no university or there is no professional organization who are teaching that, right? So they're looking for people who would like to jump into the industry. And this is an absolutely perfect time to actually start thinking about it. And finally, what we call emerging markets, our new target to find workforce. Emerging markets, a country like Ukraine, right? The countries which are known as the hotbed, as up and coming technology hotbed. It's the countries who were probably ignored for a long time, who never had a chance to get educated in this field. But today, it's time to do that. And Gartner and a lot of analysts and a lot of consulting companies and a lot of vendors are actively looking how to get and how to tap into this absolutely untouched market of people. This is one of the reasons why I'm talking to you today. If you look on the LinkedIn jobs for identity management, if you can do it today, take it out. Just in the United States today, that was actually, I did this slide up several days ago, but check it out with today. We're talking about almost 51,000 open positions. Think about it. 51,000 open positions. And as you see, some of them contains the word remote, which means you can work from wherever you want, okay? So this is the reason why I strongly recommend if you're interested, to take a look at this field, contact me, contact our organizer, Vladimir Buzmakov, and start to discuss, if you're interested to get in, what we need to do, okay? The market is growing tremendously. Even with recession following, I can tell you right now that because identity governance is a part of IT security umbrella, it will be only growing. No manager in the world will cut the workforce in IT security with all of the situations going on right now. Okay? Now, probably your next question is how to get into the space. Well, it's very interesting, but today you have so much materials online, then you can actually go online and check. And you find that you can study yourself. So, first of all, the people who would like to get into the area needs to learn the basics of identity governance. So whatever I just talked to and more. There is an organization called ID Pro. I'm a member of it. This organization, there are some members, corporate members of this organization in Ukraine. And ID Pro website contains absolutely free book of knowledge, which you can actually read a lot about the identity management, identity governance, and you can take a test. So every company who we're working with and who are looking for people first want to make sure you don't need a huge technical knowledge, a huge business knowledge. You just need to learn simple, basic things. It's basic. After you pass this exam, you can go to any of the IGA product providers' websites and get their certificate. That is, again, does not require you to take actual physical classes. You can learn it online. You can see how the product works. And if you're a technologist, or if you're a business guy who knows something about business process, this shouldn't be that difficult, because a lot of things and again, we're talking about very basic certification, first level. And finally, if those two are done, then you can definitely contact somebody like me and going through the interview with two IGA professionals. Since vendors, and trust me, I was just from the conference, who told me that if you have people who can pass both too, a lot of companies would like to talk to you, even with zero experience. Why? Because if you are able to grasp the understanding and your English, and by the way, that is very important, English. If your English is up to the level to talk to them, the company would love to put you on a trial period of 3 months to actually start from the lab and then shadowing the real live projects. Companies are open to ideas to bring new people on board just to watch what other people are doing and giving them tasks. And if after this, you can successfully pass the review process with partner vendor, then you will be assigned a real project assignment and actually start to earn money in this field. That is basically the 3 phases of getting into the field. Okay? Those are the websites which you should take a look at if you're interested in this thing. This is ID Pro website and also the vendor's website. So since right now it's 9:02, I think this is a typical, education for the vendor. I'm not going to go through that, but somebody's interested. You see the blocks. The only thing you need to do first is just this first block, right? If you can do a data now and identity security standpoint certifications first, then to get this process through, to get the certificate, again, then one of these 3 steps you fulfill. And finally, a couple of words, what consulting services do. This is what they do. You're working with implementing the projects of identity governance across the world. You provide the services of installation, configuration management, advisory, which means you recommend people what to do and how to do it, training and education of the customers, and sometimes on-demand product development. Why? Because in some companies, you have a proprietary application, which do not have a standard connector, which means you have to write a code which allows from the identity governance system to create, change, remove accounts and entitlements to the particular application. And finally, today, consulting is remote work with rare visits to the customers. I'm doing right now 2 projects. Both of them are completely remote. I've been at the customer once. Seriously. So that is the way we work today. Okay? So as you can look at this and you can look at something, you probably will understand that IGA services contains of discovery, implementation, post-implementation support, and training and education. Okay. I think this is the end of what I would like to tell you. And I hope if anyone has any questions about this, right now it's time. And go ahead. Vladimir, you can ask me question in English, or ви можете мені задати питання українською мовою. Так що, будь ласка. Чекаю.
Окей. Питань не було.
Володя, може, ти маєш якісь питання?
А я би хотів, щоб хтось питання задав.
Ну, хтось прийшов, що я бачив, що люди зайняті зараз, тим більше, що як ти мені казав, що, але...
Так.
Ще... Угу. Ну, добре. Значить...
Ну, питань не виникло поки що, я бачу.
Ага. Значить, хотів би сказати, по-перше, подякувати Володі за організацію цього семінару, цього вебінару. Якщо комусь цікаво повторити для своїх колег, будь ласка, зв'яжіться з Володією, він знає, як зі мною зв'язатися. Буду дуже радий ще раз розказати чи пояснити. Але хочу закінчити тим, що ця область розвивається настільки швидко, що дійсно ми не встигаємо знаходити нових людей. І я знаю, що в Україні є дуже багато талановитих хлопців і дівчат, яким цікаво працювати з технологіями майбутнього. Буду дуже радий, якщо хтось з вас захоче зв'язатися і буде зацікавлений навчитися чи мати якісь поради в зв'язку з цим. І можу підтвердити, що моє спілкування з американськими колегами теж показується. У мене є питання від Іллі, справи мали з саморобними IDM. Звичайно. Є компанії, які зробили IDM в своїх компаніях, є компанії, є стартапи. Кожний день з'являються якісь стартапи, які показують новий продукт цієї області, які спеціалізуються, чи може більш general. Проблема з IDM-продуктами не в тому, що його складно зробити, а в тому, що його складно підтримувати далі. Бо кожен продукт має свої проблеми, свої позитивні, свої негативні сторони. І треба мати багато часу, щоб навчитися, як з цим продуктом працювати. Якщо продукт не має багато клієнтів, то серед професійно professional services компаній дуже мало інтересу вчитися цьому продукту. Тому тут така цікава дуже ситуація, що ми вже знаходимося в такому часу, що дуже складно маленьким компаніям зайти на ринок як General IGA tool. Але, звичайно, якщо вони спеціалізуються на якихось деталях, не покривають всі 7 великих ерій, але, наприклад, концентруються на аналітиці. Так? Звичайно, дуже багато нових продуктів буде з'являтися. Чи об'єднують, наприклад, IT-security і identity governance. Це теж, звичайно, з'являється. Чи, наприклад, вони краще працюють з хмарними технологіями, ніж стандартні продукти. Це теж з'являється. Але я б сказав, що на сьогоднішній день вже ринок стабілізувався і, мабуть, концентрація буде на продуктах, які вже є. Так. Чи працюєте за рішенням від крупних хмарних провайдерів? Звичайно. AWS, Amazon Web Services, like ми знаємо, має свою систему, яка називається AWS Identity. Чому вона з'явилася? Тому що, як ви розумієте, дуже багато компаній мають свої рішення, хмарне рішення в AWS. І до них треба мати доступ теж. Тому AWS зробила своє Identity Service, яке зараз інтегрується з головними рішеннями, такими як Okta, як SailPoint, як OneIdentity. І у них є своя внутрішня система Identity, і вони працюють з іншими. Тому стає все більше і більше попит на Identity, AWS Identity. Я персонально знаю людей, які відповідають це в Амазоні, і які точно так же зацікавлені в тому, щоб знайти собі нових співробітників, не обов'язково full-time, але й консалтантів. І якщо комусь цікаво AWS Identity, то, звичайно, це дуже гарна ідея його вивчити і спробувати зрозуміти, як воно працює. Можу зразу сказати, що AWS Identity з функціональної точки зору значно менше має можливостей, ніж ведучі програми, бо воно сконцентровано на AWS. І AWS стратегія не робити величезний продукт, а інтегруватися з тими, що існує.
Чи була якась співпраця з українськими компаніями в тебе?
У мене персонально, звичайно, була співпраця і є. Мій найбільший партнер в Україні – це компанія Бакатек. Інша компанія, з якою я співпрацюю, це Хайдіс. Ця компанія займається authentication і має спеціальний продукт для second factor і multi-factor authentication. За допомогою hardware і software devices. Серед партнерів-імплементерів, тут присутні людина Олег Маковій, це компанія, з якими ми працюємо. Партнери, мій вендор, з яким я працював багато років, це One Identity, який має кілька партнерів в Україні через Бакатек, бо Бакатек їх реселер. І я в Україні робив персонально проєкт багато років тому з одним банком. З компанією Бакатек був організатор цього проєкту. І я знаю, що в Україні є спеціалісти з Identity Governance, як Олег, наприклад. Але це тільки початок. І я, звичайно, мрію про той час, коли вже буде мир, коли Україна переможе, і я зможу знову повернутися до Києва і проводити семінари і роботи, і партнерські роботи вживу з моїми партнерами і з новими, з людьми, які зацікавляться цією областю.
Дякую. Чи з'явилися ще запитання, колеги? Тоді, мабуть, будемо дякувати Владу. І якщо запитання з'являться, то, скажімо так, контакти є, зв'язатись можна. Відео буде доступне, правда, не в повному трошки обсязі. У нас стався форс-мажор, у мене хвилин на 5 пропало світло, поки перемкнувся на мобільний зв'язок, трошки часу втратило десь у запису, то вже вибачайте, так вже буде. Тому десь, якщо там логічно буде зв'язок втрачений у відео, чи будете задавати запитання. Добре, тоді дякую всім за участь і, мабуть, до наступних зустрічей. Відео я тоді вимикаю. Можливо, Влад ще хоче декілька слів сказати, щоб завершити якось.
Так. Я б хотів би сказати, звичайно, мені дуже приємно, що Володя мене запросив на цей семінар. Мені дуже приємно спілкуватися з аудиторією з України, особливо в цей важкий час. Хочу вам сказати, що ми в Америці робимо все для того, щоб не тільки наша діаспора, але й всі мої американські колеги роблять все для того, щоб Україна перемогла. І ми за вас молимося, щоб ви були здорові, живі і щоб ми нарешті дожили до моменту, коли Україна справжньо стане вільна. І мені дуже б хотілося приймати участь серйозно в тому, що в відновленні і в будуванні нового пула, як ви кажете, талантів, щоб світ дізнався про те, що Україна не тільки вміє воювати, а ще Україна вміє дуже цікаві речі робити і в технологічному, і в культурному, і в науковому сенсі. Тому дуже дякую. Слава Україні! І гарного вам дня.
Слава. Дякую вам.